but not least, we have with us online Professor Tom Smith, that has been patiently waiting for his time to speak. I'm sure that we will all take into great consideration the knowledge he has to share with us. So, Professor, if you are hearing me, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Rodrigo, for inviting me. I'm going to be as quick as I can because I know you all are ready to have your lunch. So let me start my presentation. And if somebody could just confirm to me that you are seeing it okay.
Professor, just wait a moment. We are waiting just for the presentation to show up also on the big screen. So as soon as the organization is able to do that, I will give you a word.
Thank you.
Pedi então para colocarem a apresentação no ecrã por trás de nós. Okay, so the presentation is now visible. You can continue.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry I can't be with you today for one reason or another, but I hope that what I have to say will be of interest. Just very quickly, I'm a chemist. I've worked in the explosives industry for a long time, and now I work all over the world. Critically, we wrote a report in the end of 2016. It was a jointly commissioned report by the football authorities and the supporters' representatives, and it had very, very clear implications for the use of pyrotechnics in stadia by fans. Since then, we've developed an updated report that deals with new types of pyrotechnics that are being used and administrative incidents. And both of those reports should be available free of charge from the UEFA website, and I would encourage you to go and see them. Now, just to set the scene, this is a short video of some of the problems that we have seen throughout Europe. It is unfortunately seemingly an increasing problem, and I do know that it is a problem within Portugal as well. So a very quick introductory video.
The scar goes from down here all the way up to here.
Now what's happened here? Has it been struck by something? Yes, a firework. Oh, that's awful to see.
Well, the key conclusions of the report are that there are very significant health and safety risks from the use of pyro. And it's not just to spectators, it's to security personnel, to stewards, and to the emergency services. The pyrotechnic safety distances which are on these devices far exceed the space available within a crowd. Dealing with them is inherently a risk, and ultimately the conclusion of the report was no safe use of pyrotechnics possible in spectator areas at football events within the stadia or in other crowded places. That is absolutely clear. So who's affected by the pyrotechnics? Well, those people who are actually using them, those nearby, others in the stadium, and that is an increasing problem when projectile items are being used and the effect is remote from where the pyrotechnic has been lit. People outside the stadium on the way in, and people dealing with them, including yourselves as policemen. And what is the potential for harm? Well, obviously burns to flesh, burns to clothing, in the extreme cases, burns or explosive effects to persons or structures. We are aware of some incidences where hundreds or even thousands of kilos of pyrotechnics have been stored within a stadium prior to an event, and if that caught fire before the event, there would be significant structural effects. What are the effects on people? Well, mostly the smoke, acute toxic effects, and I'll illustrate that a little later. Some of these smokes are carcinogenic and therefore could affect you years and years in the future. They're obviously hot, burning up to 1700, 2000 degrees centigrade. There are impact damages, particularly with the more use of projectile items. And then if you get hit in the eye or there's a loud bang, there's hearing. And we mustn't dismiss the last one on that slide, that is panic. In 2023, unfortunately, if there is a loud, unexpected bang within a closed environment, people will think that it is a potential terrorist attack and will react accordingly. And we have seen that. They're bad for the game. It stops families coming to matches. The players get distracted, or worse, like we saw in the video, they get injured. Matches get stopped, matches eventually get abandoned. And, you know, the financial implications of, for instance, a goalkeeper losing his hand because of a pyrotechnic are huge. And there will be liability issues associated with that. Now, the chemistry of pyrotechnics, they consist of their own pyrotechnic composition. It contains its own oxidant and will burn to completion. That's pretty much the definition of a pyrotechnic device. They burn at high temperatures, they produce toxic combustion byproducts, and never forget that they are explosive. So if they misbehave or have been modified or have been confined, they may act like an explosive.
Definition of the pyrotechnic is that it is self-sustaining, exothermic, and that it'll burn all the way to completion. Once you've started it light, it isn't going to go out. And that's critical. You can't dip them in water, you can't put sandbags on them, they will continue to burn. So the oxidant is crucial to the pyrotechnic industry, otherwise it's just burning. This is what makes it a pyrotechnic. So the point of this test is to show, as we described, that because a pyrotechnic contains both oxidant and fuel, it's not reliant on atmospheric oxygen. Not only that, it burns so hot that what we'll do is to be able to insert it into a bucket of water where it will continue to burn. You want to pop it in once more? And out again, and it's still burning. So, Tom, if you could light that for us. And Tom, if you'd like to try and put it out with some sand. However much you put on there, it's still burning. And it's getting hotter and hotter, and probably it'll burst through in a moment. So even sand on that burning firework will not put it out.
Now that's critical. I don't think that many people understand the fact that these pyrotechnics cannot be put out. So approaching them is dangerous. You don't know what they're going to do. Some of them could explode. and anything that you try and do will put you in close proximity to them. We have numerous incidents of where items have been thrown onto the pitch, lots of flares, and then one of them is designed to explode. And you saw in the video a French steward who lost his hand because he picked up a pyrotechnic device which then exploded. So the effects, as I've said, high intensity flame, high temperatures, toxic smoke, projectile effects, and ultimately explosive effects. Never underestimate the power of these pyrotechnic devices. Too often we've seen people just dismiss them. Oh, they're only fireworks. I could have bought them in a shop. Well, no, they're not designed to be used in those close proximity to other people, and when they are, the effects can be very serious. So what are the types of device that we see? Well, commonly handheld flares, distress flares, you can see them on the screen there, deliberate smoke devices, bangers, fountains, and even, seemingly in Germany to a large extent, sparklers. Pack enough sparklers into a tube and in essence you've made a pipe bomb. Less common devices include rockets, Roman candles, single shot devices, the so-called things called cakes, and mines. And these have in common that they are projectile items. So we have seen situations where they've been shot from one side of a stadium right the way across the playing surface to the other side of the stadium. So it's not a matter that you're only affecting those people who are like-minded and seem to revel in the use of pyrotechnics at an event, but you're now affecting people who are innocent, people who've brought their kids and their grandkids to a stadium and have an absolute right to leave that stadium in the same state of health as they entered it, and yet they're being affected by these pyrotechnic projectile items. So the key message from the report, as I said before, the original report, no safer use of pyrotechnics possible within spectator areas or other crowded places. And the message to all those dealing with pyrotechnics, whether they be stewards, emergency services, and players themselves, move away, leave them alone, let them burn out. Because if you do anything else, you are putting yourself at risk. Let me just see if I can go back one. So move away, get at least 5 meters away. It's important in terms of educating stewards and players in particular who are role models for the fans to be seen to get away so that they recognize the dangers. Move away at least 5 meters. You can't extinguish it, leave it alone. You saw in the video, water or sand makes no difference, so that anything you do puts yourself close to it. You can fight a fire on a pitch or in the stands. Water extinguishers are best because they cool as well as remove oxygen, and stand 5 meters away and play water on the surface. If there is a fire on the pitch or on a seat, yes, that can be fought, but you will not put out the pyrotechnic device itself. And then let it burn out. You don't know what it will do next. It might explode. The picture at the bottom there is the steward who went to try and pick up a device, and luckily it exploded just before he put his hand on it. If it had been 2 or 3 seconds later, he would have had it in his hand, and I have no doubt that he would have lost his fingers or had lost his entire hand. So let it burn to completion, and then, and only then, deal with it. Put the spent case into a bucket of water and let a suitably qualified person, probably a fireman, deal with it properly. In terms of briefing, well, this applies to everybody. It applies to stewards, it applies to players, it applies to the emergency services and others. Make sure everybody's involved. Brief them prior to the season. Brief them particularly prior to a match, especially where it is known that pyrotechnics could be a problem. And in terms of the football authorities, like other events on the pitch, racism, homophobic attacks, throwing of missiles, consider a 3-step procedure. Stop the match and make a public address announcement, take the players off, and ultimately perhaps abandon the match. Nobody wants that to happen, but we have to understand the seriousness of the problem that we're dealing with. Just a little video again about not picking up pyrotechnics, and I warn you that this has some fairly horrific images in it. I'm sorry that this is straight before lunch, but it is important to understand the problem. There were some extremely disturbing images within that video, and I'll pick out two of them apart from the obvious towards the end. Why at the beginning were stewards and emergency services picking up pyrotechnics that weren't even on the pitch? Just leave them alone. You don't know what they're going to do. And you saw at the very end of that video, you know, they can go bang. And if they go bang when they're in your hand, you will lose fingers or a hand, no doubt. And the second thing, which is incredibly worrying, is players picking them up and throwing them back into the crowd. It is giving entirely the wrong message. And I think players in particular, who, as I said, are role models, need to be seen to be doing the right thing and to be seen to be understanding what the risks are. But I'd extend it up from that. I think that is important for the police, and I think it's even important for the courts to understand what the problems are, because if they don't, they won't punish sufficiently. So what are the chemistry again? Well, you produce toxic byproducts, nitrogen oxides, carbon oxides, metal salts. There are long-term and there are short-term effects. Never underestimate the power of these things. What we did was to look at the air quality levels within Stadia according to EU standards, assuming 10 pyrotechnics are lit, and then look at how the smoke might distribute through the stadium. And there is a sort of graphical impression of where we estimated these smokes, and then the red figures in the table at the bottom show the level of these toxic components, nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide, compared to what the EU limits are. And you can see they are huge. So there are serious implications for potential health effects, both short-term and long-term. In terms of liability, who's going to be liable? You know, the people who throw them, but the people who are affected by them. You cannot dismiss the harm that can be done. And that picture there really worries me, because that's a piece of equipment that's presumably been provided by the stadium or the club. It's a bucket into which somebody has put the pyrotechnics, and if it went bang when it was in that bucket, as we've seen on the pitch, you've effectively got a bomb and bits of metal flying around. So for clubs and organisations, you've got to train the players, officials, stewards. So like that bucket, giving bad information or equipment is really bad and undoubtedly makes you liable. Giving no information makes you liable as well. And giving good information is the only way. Good information, repeated often, documented. If you try and authorise pyrotechnics, which some have tried to do, who's making the decision as to what is authorised and on what basis? It doesn't solve the problems like smoke and what happens when there's an accident. We've seen in the States, you know, ridiculous situations of, for instance, a designated smoke area. But smoke can't read. Smoke will spread. That smoke will spread throughout the stadium. This was in Germany as a trial, and effectively it self-defeated the point that they were trying to make, because the smoke moves throughout the stadium and affects everybody in the stands. Why was it even started? Very, very quickly, there are new types of pyrotechnics, perhaps new uses, and then I'll just touch on a couple of recent enforcement activities. Projectile items, as I've said, Roman candles, single-shot devices, even shells and rockets. And these will not only travel across the stadium, but when they get to the other side, they will burst, as you see in that picture. Really dangerous. Cold pyrotechnics have been suggested by various fan groups, but they're still hot. They are cooler than traditional pyrotechnics, but they are still hot, 500 degrees C. They still produce toxic gases, they're still pyrotechnic, you still can't put them out, and they aren't approved for use. So, honestly, cold pyrotechnics are a fallacy. And just look at this. This is the temperature of the flames of these so-called cold pyrotechnics in red on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, the temperatures at which damage starts occurring. To skin, like in a shower, 44 degrees C, you start getting skin damage. You start getting severe burns at 80 degrees C. And yet, the temperatures of the flame are somewhere between 550 and 1,000 degrees C. We've also seen worrying developments like this of pyrotechnics being packed into tubes, hidden in drain pipes, and then remotely ignited. That really worries me, because however awful we think some of the use by the fan groups is, they are lighting them in their hand, and they are seeing the situation when they light them and whether there are people around. If it's done remotely, how do you know? the button might be pushed, this might go off, and somebody might be standing right over it. There have been successes. Some 400 odd tons of pyrotechnics have been confiscated and websites have been shut down who are deliberately trying to sell pyrotechnics to these ultra groups. But unfortunately, the nature of the internet is such that if you shut a website down today, it'll probably resurrect itself tomorrow. So the conclusions, as I've said, no safe use of pyrotechnics possible in spectator areas at football events within the stadia or in other crowded places. And in dealing with them, move away, leave them alone, let them burn out. I'd like to thank UEFA for assistance with preparing this presentation and for the videos, and for colleagues all around Europe who've helped me collate and provide information. And I'd like to thank you for listening. Thank you very much.